Mr. Pierce?
Here.
Mrs. Dickey?
Here.
Mrs. Rossmaster?
Here.
Mrs. Jones? Here. Mr. Welch?
Here.
And Mrs. Brew?
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Okay, we're gonna start with citizens' request to address the board. I know I have one, I think maybe one other was filling one out.
Yeah, there's two more.
Okay.
Who's doing his off the home?
All right, we'll start with, this one, but before we start, remember this is an opportunity for the public to address the board on agenda and non-agenda items. All comments or concerns are to be directed to the board president and limited to 3 minutes. Please be advised, this is not an opportunity for participants to converse in two-way communication with the board, but for the board to hear comments and concerns. If warranted, the school administration may respond at or before the next regular board meeting. Please begin by stating your name and address. All right, I'll go in the order that I received these. And I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Is it Jeanette?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jeanette Ropetta and I'm a resident of Fenton. One of the reasons I feel compelled to speak this afternoon is because I attended your last board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I saw that there were many concerns voiced by other Fenton residents. And so I'm wondering, and again, I know you said it's not a two-way conversation, but I am gonna ask a couple questions. What I'm wondering is when we might hear a response from the superintendent that will address the concerns that were expressed at the meeting. And Emily, what you just said was either tonight or the next meeting, so I'm expecting that the superintendent will address those questions from the last meeting tonight. That's awesome to know. To remind you, there were several concerns about the equality badge that some teachers are wearing or displaying. These concerns include the fact that parents have not been informed about this badge, they don't know where it originated, they don't know who is distributing it, and why it does not represent all students. Because it clearly does not represent all students. It does not represent actually some large groups of students. I really was hopeful last meeting that after public comment time that these concerns would be addressed, but there was no board discussion and the superintendent did not say a word either. And hi, you're here. I'm sure that you, the superintendent, pride yourself on educating others, informing people, being transparent, and communicating properly with all the parties involved, okay? Working together as a community, right? Then why the silence on this subject? Is there something to hide? And if not, why not address these concerns? Another concern, when I watched the videotaped meeting, it was very apparent that a couple of board members were acting quite hostile to the residents who got up to speak. One was rolling her eyes and smirking the whole time. Another was focused almost exclusively on her laptop. These two members specifically showed a great lack of respect, even disdain for the residents. And that's kind of funny in my eyes because these are the people that actually employ you. They pay your salaries and they have the power to vote you out next time. And I just don't understand why you don't want to answer the questions. So, most importantly though, the children don't belong to you. They don't belong to the teachers. They don't belong to the state. They belong to their parents, to their legal guardians. And that's a very, very important message that I hope that you guys hear. So I'm really asking you is really just to do your job, which includes informing the people properly about what you're doing with the children, the information that you're giving them, and answering all the questions that have been presented to you. The time to do that is now at this meeting, and I really hope you answer some of the questions from the last meeting specifically. I'm hopeful that you can make time to do that, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeanette. Okay, the next one I have is Jason Teddy.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me again. Sorry I was a little bit late. A couple issues I'd like to discuss. This last meeting I was here, I expressed some concerns about the context of the I'm Here badges. What I'm disappointed is the following day, a member of this board posted that badge on social media and expressed unwavering support for what it represents. The concern I have is that was pretty much a symbolic middle finger to the parents that came before this board and expressed their concerns respectfully and reasonably. You know, putting a disclaimer on a website that specifically identifies an individual as a board member on an unofficial, and I'll say that in quotes, campaign page, well, that dog don't hunt. It reflects this board, it reflects our district. And I'm sure any competent attorney could dismantle that defense in a matter of minutes in court of law. So I'm asking the board to consider passing, passing a resolution of censorship on any comments that reflect the board's position or may be interpreted as reflecting the board's position on such controversial issues before the result. The next thing I'd like to discuss is the symbology associated with the equality badge. That is essentially a facsimile of the NEA badge that was put on. Notice in 6 of the 8 characters on that badge, 6 of those 8 characters represent some form of sexuality. Let that sink in for a minute. So why are we talking to our kids about sexuality at school? This is not sex education. Doesn't belong in the school. And the green semicolon, not sure I understand how equality applies to suicide. It's mixed messages that don't belong in our schools. I don't walk down the halls or go to a football game and say, that's a gay student, that's a straight student, that's a black student, that's a Jewish student. I see students. I see Fenton Tigers. We have policies in place already in the code of conduct to discuss discrimination and harassment. We don't need this. But the most important thing I see when I go to these games, where I walk down the halls, it's not even, the bottom line is they're kids. They're kids. They've got enough problems to worry about at this point in their life, rather than injecting some drama into something that should be left to the family or community resources, not academics. Let's focus on STEM. Let's focus on athletics. Let's go back to We Are Fenton. Let's focus on being Tigers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Teddy. The last one I have is Kimberly Pillen Brown.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Pillen Brown, and I am a graduate, a 1979 graduate, so I'm an alumni of Fenton High School. I'm also a retired teacher from Flint Community Schools. I worked for, 35 years teaching students. So I know something about students, and I know a great deal about their issues and how they feel about representation. And having worked in Flint, of course, a different school district altogether, but I know what they bring to school and a lot of their issues. But I do have to say that, you know, I went to school in the 70s. There was no recognition of kids, and my best friend is gay. I had several other friends who went to school, and many of them are now gone because we lost them to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. there was no recognition of their suffering. And there was a great deal of suffering in Fenton High School in the 1970s for kids who were queer. And I know that because I was best friends with kids who were in the LGBTQ community. I know that, I witnessed it. I am an ally. I am not LGBTQ, but I do know that. And I was one of the first people that my dear friend came out to when we graduated in 1979. I will never forget his pain. I will never forget him crying in my arms. His family, we're 62, his family's never accepted him. They still don't accept him. He's 62 years old. These are serious, serious issues. So, you know, when we talk about rainbows and symbolism, we're talking about issues of pride, and we're talking about things that people still carry with them, and they carry it with them throughout their lives because, you know, families, when we talk about, you know, leaving it to the family, sometimes there's no family for these kids. There's no family. They go and they create their family. Many of them have to leave their home and create their family. I'm his family. I'm the person he calls when he still deals with issues. Sometimes there's no support at home. And I know that that was true for my kids in Flint, who were in that community, who needed somebody, who needed family. They you know, would run away from home, and they had communities outside of these safe communities, you know, outside of the homes that they had, because there was no safe place at home. I worked in adult ed for a long time, and so I worked in adult and alternative ed as well, and so I saw this, and it was heart-wrenching. So I want to talk about my support for teachers, saying, I love you, I accept you, and that is where I stand. And as an alumni and a Tiger, with the memories of being a Tiger and going to games here in Fenton. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening to me and my words.
Thank you, Kimberly. Are there any other stuff?
No.
Item number 5 on our agenda is the architectural and engineering firm, King Scott Facility Assessment Presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Dan with King Scott. I want to introduce some of our teammates behind me. So Rob Atkins, also with King Scott.
Hi, everyone.
And Donnie.
Hello, my name is Donnie L. Wunderlich with Alpha Construction. We have had the pleasure of serving Fenton School since 2006. So thank you for having us back. A little bit about ALC. We're a Southeast Michigan builder. We are celebrating our 115th year in construction and delivering services to K-12. It's good living, a lot of water, that you can tell that I'm not 115 years old. So thank you for having us here. Our job is to assist the district in putting together pricing to all of the items that King Scott will be coming up with. You'll see us again here in the future to bring forward some pricing, some other information so as we go through this process. So thank you for having us back, and we appreciate it.
This is what we'll talk through today. And I think Heidi, you said there's another presentation that has to start at 5, so we want to be mindful of our time. So we'll kind of jump in here. This we've already covered. I would point out I'm also a Fenton graduate. I graduated in 1989. had a great time at Fenton, and I think, my education at Fenton set me up for success as an adult, so I wanna say thank you to the Fenton community. Donnie touched on this a little bit. We wanted to just, make sure that the board understood the different roles between King Scott and AUK. So we're the designers, so we're primarily architects and engineers. We're gonna be drawing things in a little while. We're responsible for producing bid documents if projects go out for bid. And we're also there to assist, Donnie's team during construction and answering questions and getting, things streamlined so that the construction can be as smooth as it can be. AUK, on the other hand, is the construction manager. Their expertise is in cost estimating and constructability, and they'll play a pivotal role in bidding out projects and then constructing and managing all of the different contractors that are there to do the work. Just a quick reminder, the district has already done a lot of work with regard to the strategic plan, and one of the key areas of focus in that is facilities. So this is leaning into that portion of the strategic plan. You guys have already reached out to the community through survey work and received information back from the community saying, here's what we feel is important. So these larger bits of text there are some of the things that we're repeating in the community input. So air conditioning, so that there's an improved learning environment for the students and for the staff that work there. There were a lot of comments back about updating the exteriors of some of the buildings that are older in the district. Certainly there were comments about creating additional safety and security across the district. There was also a discussion of skilled trades and continuing to advance the STEM and STEAM and robotics that the district offers. There were comments about doing something at Allen Street, a World of Wonder, to maybe expand that program. There also were a lot of voices saying that athletics is important, and we wanna remain competitive from an athletic standpoint. And also voices from the arts side of the equation, that performing arts was important in the district, so band, choir, and drama. So there's a lot of homework already done. There's a lot of information from the community. What King Scott and AUK have done in the last couple of months is we've gotten into the buildings. We've brought a team of architects, engineers, and CMs. We spent approximately 4 days in the building. So every space in every building we've been in, and we've been looking at it from a conditional assessment. So we had looks at structure, at mechanical, plumbing, electrical. But we've also had a technology consultant come through and talk with the technology director, Matt Garner. And King Scott has interior designers as well that have gone through and looked at all the furniture in the buildings. So we're doing a comprehensive look to establish a baseline. And a couple of the documents that you have as handouts are not complete, but they're the beginning of that information. So the 3-page document, black and white, is kind of a higher level view of some of the initial results of the assessment. And then the thicker package, the more detailed, that goes building by building. And it's a list organized kind of by discipline, so civil, architectural, mechanical, electrical, and so on. Those are just in case some of you are detailed people and you wanna go home after this and look through the detail. That's you're invited to do that. The intent wasn't to go through that document today. So this slide talks about some of the other things that we looked at, parking lots and drives, sidewalks, how vehicles move around facilities, how parents get to the place to drop off or pick up children. We looked at playgrounds and play fields, the athletic fields. The other thing that we did in this process was we sat down with staff. We talked with building principals, and the idea there was to try and get at, beyond the nuts and bolts things that you can see when you walk through a building, how well is the building doing from an educational standpoint? Are there challenges that the buildings have that are keeping you from doing and delivering the education that you want? So So we'll go through building by building and just kind of stay high level and talk about some of the things that we've seen. So at World of Wonder Ellen Street, some of the initial findings are big and bold there: air conditioning, playground upgrades, the parking lots are reaching the end of their serviceable life. And then there's some other things like casework cabinets, group toilet rooms and things like that. When we talked to the staff, these three things came up in different versions. We talked about the need potentially for a special services office suite, maybe an addition over there. There's robotics programs. The Europe program is in the two-story portion of the building over there, and those might need a new home. We also even talked about potentially, if the district determines that it's valuable and necessary, perhaps an addition over at that address for the Fenton Area Public Schools central office. When we went through North Road, State Road, and Tomac, we saw similar things. The buildings are from similar eras, so North Road and State Road were built in like 1956. Tomac's a little bit newer, built in like 61. But some of the things there were air conditioning. A lack of it right now is very challenging for the warm fall and spring months. Also, the buildings could use some updates from an exterior remodeling standpoint. And you can see some of those other things are less, maybe less of a priority, but carpet, casing, improved toilet rooms, playgrounds are important. What we saw is safe now, but again, the playground equipment is reaching the end of its serviceable life. So as the district plans and moves forward, that's something we just want to bring up for your consideration. When we sat and talked with the building principals, there was discussion of adding a kindergarten addition so that they could have free sections of kindergarten space. We also talked about STEM and STEAM because the district has that strong robotics program, and they even have it at the elementary level, and might be able to do more if they had some additional appropriate space for the program. There's not a lot of staff collaboration space in the building, so like a new elementary today, you would probably see some spaces dedicated for staff collaboration and teamwork. And the other thing that came out of the discussion was that there's not a lot of space for special education offices and group work, so that was something that was important to building principals. Looking at the middle school is the newest building, built in 2000. Air conditioning is again something that in a modern building we would do that pretty much without question. There's also some face brick deterioration on the building that should be addressed to maintain the life of the exterior of the building. The other big thing at the middle school is that in the year 2000, we weren't designing buildings the way we are today. So from a security standpoint, AGS Middle School has an office area that's in the middle of the building, and people can come in through some security, but they aren't forced through a secure entry, a vestibule. So what these images show you is that the district has been working on a solution for this, and the orange on the right is an addition that would create a new office and secure entry vestibule. The gray image on the bottom left is where the office is now, and so that would be converted back to academic use. So that's on the list for the district to consider as we move forward. And then the high school, it was interesting to come back and go through the high school in a lot of detail. There were a lot of things that came to mind. And, I was surprised it's held up very well, and it's well taken care of. But there is a lot of stuff in there that's the same, particularly the furniture, as when I was there in 1989. So you've gotten your use out of it. So some of the big things there are air conditioning as well, the parking lots, remodeling group toilet rooms, some technology and security upgrades, although there've been, modifications to the main entrance to make it more secure. Certainly on the site, there's a concern to get a sidewalk connector from sort of the very west property line all the way to where AGS property line on the east, so that students can walk safely along that instead of walking on the road, particularly in the winter. There's also a request for additional seating at the football stadium, additional bleachers at the soccer field, maybe even a soccer field press box. And then there was some interest in creating some new ball fields and even a sand volleyball court for both the school and the community use. And we talked about potentially a new field house. So field house is a term that's used for different things. Flushing Community Schools built a field house, but it's a competitive gym. That's really what it is. But some field houses are really pointed at an indoor turf facility. So that's what this discussion of a field house was that perhaps an indoor turf facility. Let's see. I put this photo in there, just kind of a reminder. In 1969, upper right picture, that's what the auditorium looked like. In 2023, a couple weeks ago, I took a picture, and it's very close to what it was. Some of the challenges with the auditorium are the 550 seats. It's not big enough to seat more than 2 classes of high school students at one time. From a technology standpoint, the lighting would be nice to upgrade that to LED, particularly the stage lighting, but house lighting as well. Getting a projector in there that could throw an image and easy for everybody to see. So there's some things there. Even the support spaces, the dressing rooms, the toilet rooms that are there, the scene shop. We heard and saw that, that's probably something that might need to be remodeled a little bit.
Dan, do you think that's the original curtain on the stage?
I do.
I think it is too.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was probably really good fiber in 1969.
They don't make them like they used to.
So the seats are new. So the seats in the bottom right
Yep.
are new. So it's not the original seating, but and I think the wood floor is the same. It's just been really painted. And then the building that we're in, this was built at the same time the high school was, and it received an addition in some later years. There's not a lot at this building. There's parking lots that need to be redone. There's a little bit of deterioration of the exterior finish that you see there in that bottom picture. There's some stairways that could use new handrails and so on, but not a lot at this building. So we've done that, as I said, to do kind of a baseline, to create a starting point. And so our field work is complete. And right now, Donnie's team is crunching numbers to assign costs to each of these numbers. And today we're here to just share this information with you, to get your input. If you have questions from what you've seen, we can address those. But really, what we want to do is share information today, and build towards a meeting with you again at the beginning of May. Kind of again share direction, have more information on cost and more information on options, to then lead to a board meeting probably June 5th, which would be our goal to determine final priorities, scope, and cost if the district decides to pursue a bond program. So the district is trying to line up for a potential bond vote in November, on November 7th. So in order to do that, this is sort of the time frame that we need to make decisions to move forward on. This is a graphic version of that, if you're a little more graphic than text, some of us are. And then this is kind of what the opportunity is for the district, is the gentleman who's going to be here, RJ, at 5 o'clock, will talk about this. But these are kind of the big points, is that there's an opportunity to generate a fairly significant amount of money within a zero mill tax increase. And it could be used to improve academics, athletics, and arts in the manner that you guys decide. And keep Fenton, a destination school, something that people like me can graduate from and go on to greater things. I think that's all. So,
Question for, actually for all three of you, you might be able to answer. In your assessment of all the buildings and facilities and everything that you identified, which is rather thorough, and I appreciate that, did you also happen to identify and pass on to our staff here or anybody in urgent matters, safety issues, stuff that
Yeah.
needed to be addressed immediately rather than wait as part of, was there any of that that was identified?
no, we didn't see anything, and that's, sometimes we do. Sometimes we say, hey, there's an unsafe condition here, and this needs to be addressed immediately, but we didn't see anything like that.
Okay.
The closest that we have are probably, some handrails, guardrails, kind of safety things that are, some of them are original. There's different code requirements now around those things, so those will appear in the list there, but
Okay.
we didn't see anything that was
Nothing
dangerous.
that was red flag that needed to be addressed, like now for the safety of the students and staff? Okay.
I think the district has done a really good job of abatement of asbestos materials, because we didn't run into anything we could see. Any other, questions or some of your thoughts or feedback on what we're sharing?
It's a big project.
Yeah.
It's exciting. The only thing that I would, just kind of throw out there, and I said it to our operations committee, is that of all of this, I would like to make sure that if we're doing the air conditioning, that it's set for, I know we're gonna kind of do this as maybe hopefully a series, but I would like to see that as a number one item for all buildings right away. I just think that it's important that, we get that out there for, so the community knows that it's not gonna, something that the air's not gonna be in phases, that I would like to see that as a number one item project for all of our buildings at the same time. I mean, not the same summer, but I mean, at least if we could get it over.
In a program that would.
Yes, yeah.
Take care of that, okay.
I just think that's, it's just important for our community.
I think too, we also talked at that same subcommittee meeting that, the staff told us you were very thorough, which that made me feel really good that, they said pretty much there wasn't anything uncovered, so thank you for doing that. We appreciate that we have a thorough, report back on exactly where we're at.
I do have a couple more images. Let's see, let me jump to this one. So in our discussions about the auditorium, this is some of what I talked about. Where we have a couple of slides that show you what might happen or what it could look like if you tried to get to a 900 seat auditorium. So in the middle there, you can see the rows of seats in the auditorium. This orange shape is an overlay of a 900 seat footprint from actually Gull Lake schools. So you can see that the south wall is gonna step out a significant amount. But there is land out there to do it. So there's one good thing about almost every building in the district is you guys have a lot of land around the buildings. So this actually did the overlay just so you could kind of see what's beneath it, but here's what it might look like. That long bar on the right hand side would potentially be support space for a drama program. But this kind of reuses existing stage footprint, but would probably rebuild a lot of things south of there.
Would a balcony be feasible?
A balcony would be feasible, it's just expensive. But it definitely would work, you have the room to do it. And I think the other one that we just to give you an image of what a field house, would look like. So the, typical field house that we're seeing, being created in districts for, multi-purpose use, so academic, as well as athletic, but, they'll do their own programs and things like that. But this shows a 300-meter track, which is basically the driver for how big this would be. And then within that, turf that would then be lined for all kinds of sports. And then on the left-hand side, you can see you can do it any kind of number of different ways, but there's room for team rooms and mechanical and things like that, so. Rob, you've been doing this at.
So a few more things on this concept. The goal was not just for athletics. So we had designated spaces for STEAM programs, certainly taking advantage of a high box area. We also, marching band, a lot of the fine art programs, they wanted this field house to really not, field house really implies an athletic facility. But this is really a multi-use facility that, they wanted to almost touch every kid in the district, or every student, I should say, so. And I would say this is probably one of the things that we get, asked about in almost all the districts we serve. You can, with teams having to practice later in the evenings, dealing with weather for the outdoor athletics, having an indoor facility like this provides a lot of advantages to the students and really to the community. A lot of them have a community use component too. So, definitely something to consider.
Rob, is that track elevated or is that on the ground though?
That one happens to be on the ground.
Okay.
It's all, they wanted everything at grade, but we have done them with elevated tracks overlooking a field or, competition areas, so. You can do them multiple ways. So, does the board, have any comments or thoughts as it relates to a field house?
Yes, where are you thinking as far as possible location?
So we would look at multiple, obviously this campus, cause you wanna have a strong connection to your buildings. But is there a designated spot for this yet? No. That would be something we would certainly explore. I would say the one thing that Fenton has, a lot of districts, you have land. You have developable land, so I think you have a lot of opportunities to consider for this.
So just to be clear, you think based on the land we have, that would work without acquiring?
Yes.
There's quite a bit of room that way. And, yeah, I mean, there was some discussion of potentially closer to Owen Road, but the other part of that is that the land closest to Owen Road is very valuable from a commercial standpoint. So, I think going through a process of exploration with the district would, if this was the direction you guys decided to go, would be something we would do.
And getting your input on that too, they'll give us possible choices possibly, hey, it could go here, it could go there, and then getting your input on where that would be viable.
If we were talking about neighboring districts, is Linden the only one that has something like this now?
Flushing has something very similar to this, I know Clarkston and Grand Blanc just put one in, Swartz Creek has a performing arts center, separate center, but they just remodeled their whole kind of athletic facilities. So several kind of districts are going down that idea of, okay, we're in Michigan, we need to have some type of climate control situation for some of our athletics, so, yeah.
Yeah, this slide was just, cause we were talking with Heidi and Doug about what are other districts doing, what do you see a lot of? And so, from an academic standpoint, we see air conditioning is very important to the educational environment. So that's, almost every district that we're working with is, how do we make it a better environment for kids and for learning? Then STEAM, STEM, robotics, programs are being advanced. The other one is early childhood, so there's, like Lake Fenton is working on a plan for an early childhood center. From an athletic standpoint, we talked about the, field house, but if a field house is something that's, too big, too expensive, auxiliary gyms are things that we're doing a lot of because of that. Kids practicing till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, so how do we create more space for them so they don't have to be up that late? And then arts, improvements, so, we do a lot of, auditoriums, we do a lot of performing arts centers. We do a lot of projects where we're coming into one, that's like Fenton, where it hasn't had much done to it, and we're redoing the lighting, and we're redoing the rigging, and we're taking out the old curtains, and we're putting in new curtains, and we're upgrading technology so that it maybe doesn't change shape, but it becomes, again, a state-of-the-art, contemporary, you can do whatever you can do, so.
Also, I wondered, I know air conditioning is their number one concern. Is it true that with the safety concerns we have now, are teachers able to open their windows?
In some buildings, yes, in some buildings, no, depending on when it was built, and depending on the location of the classroom as well.
So we actually have some classrooms that it can be,
That they can open their windows.
we have some that can't.
Correct.
And generally, I'll tell you from experience, opening windows doesn't help.
For the climate. For climate.
No, I mean, when it's hot, it
Yeah.
just gets hotter,
Well,
so.
I taught at Linden before we had air conditioning, I remember, but we were able to open windows and had huge fans, and so it was survivable, I guess.
Right.
But I did hear someone tell me that there were some rooms in our district that can't open the windows.
Correct.
I would say another reason we see a lot of AC improvements in our projects now is, just improving air quality, air changes. Ventilation, ever since COVID and especially when you're dealing with older buildings. So there's not only the benefit of cooling, making it more comfortable, but having increased air changes and that ventilation is, we're getting more and more questions or requests for that as well.
That was gonna be my only point. I did miss the operations meeting, which I apologize for the last one, but I've been from day one a huge proponent of that from an air conditioning standpoint, as I know, living with an educator that deals with it in the fall when they come back, and then the spring when things heat up. That being said, I'm also a realist and realize that the amount of cooling days that we have over the course of a 365 year is minimal. And how do we balance whatever, projected system we implement or potentially implement in the process with, good fiscal management, which, we've gotta take into account the cooling days. I understand it. Like I said, I live with one. She tells me every day, and I've got pictures of exactly how warm her classroom is at certain times of the year. That being said, there's ways, and I think you guys understand what I'm talking about there, to try to keep that at the forefront as well.
This is probably less of a question for you, and just something that I wanna mention for our board to talk about, but as we decide what we wanna do, I know we try to be open to the community, but there may be ways, depending on what we add, that we could also monetize some of this. Like if we have I don't know how it usually works, I'm very new, but if we have air conditioning, are we able to rent out buildings in the summer and charge for that, for example, to try to offset? I know, we're talking millions of dollars to install it, but every little bit helps, so it's just an idea. I'm a big proponent for air conditioning.
Other comments or?
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
In part of your facilities study, were you able to take a look at the different traffic patterns around the schools, particularly before and after school time? Cause I know it's come up a lot in discussion, just more and more kids do not ride the bus, therefore there is more and more traffic before and after school. So just thinking if there is any way to improve on what we currently have.
Yeah, I think, so we talked about North Road, and I just remember North Road in a different way, but I think all of them, all the elementaries are challenging. So I think as this group moves forward, we probably need to be looking at, some of those, how can we make it better? Cause you're right, very few kids are riding the bus, and that just means, so many more cars for parents driving.
On that, were you able to be at the buildings at that time? Like, were you able to like witness the traffic patterns?
No, because we were cramming it all
Smart
in
move.
like 4 days, because those were days that there weren't kids in the building.
Okay.
So we were primarily, but.
I just wondered if you got a sense of it in any way.
So, this is probably one of the biggest requests we get, especially for elementaries, and usually elementaries, are limited on land, and which makes it difficult to increase capacity of drop-off lanes, pickup lanes, etc. Also having that clear separation between buses and all your parents visiting, or, you know, a lot of parents will come drop off kids, go, other parents like to park, walk their kids in, so you deal with that dynamic as well. I will say how we approach it now is much different than we did probably even 5-6 years ago. And that is really working closely with the school on when do they open the building? How long is that congestion queue? Usually it's like an intense 20 minutes, like in the morning. And how far does it back up? If it impacts a local road, we'll talk to that local jurisdiction. But getting very familiar with the practices of the building, as far as how soon do they let kids in, how do they get kids from the cars into the elementaries, for instance. And same thing with dismissal. You know, I know a lot of schools now where they have a very organized effort with walkie-talkies, people outside, you know, they see parents come in, juniors coming out to get in the car to get out of the site real quick. It's not an easy solution. We typically can improve it, but do we eliminate the total congestion? That's very difficult to do, but I can almost tell you we've been to elementaries similar to what you're dealing with. Yes.
Great. You mentioned working with local jurisdiction. I think one thing to be mindful, the city is redoing a lot of roads, and I know some of them are right in front of our buildings, and some are slated to begin even this summer or be finished. So I think it would be important to coordinate, like if there is maybe an extra wide shoulder to accommodate after school traffic or something, that those conversations, we don't miss out on those conversations.
A week from today, last week,
Perfect.
yeah, I was at the city council meeting and we talked about the road project.
Perfect.
And they did talk to us about, when the phases of that is coming in, and they explicitly said, discussing with the school district on those phases and things like that. They've come up with a little bit of issues over in the Tomac side and the numbered streets, road projects, that they've had to kind of go back, and it's stalled a little bit. I do think they will start the state road kind of side of things, this calendar year, but when that is, they wanna finish the numbered streets first, so that phase 1 first.
Would you say that all buildings are having an issue? Or is it, I mean, like, out here, everybody's gotta go?
I think so. I mean, there's some issue at every building. I mean, and it's probably worse at others, but I don't know, you know, the specifics of it, but I have heard complaints from all 3 levels that, you know. And then, you know, you can do as much as you can, and if people don't follow the guidelines that are set up for drop off and pick up, then
I wasn't gonna go into that.
I'll say it.
That is the truth.
Well, to Rob's point though, that collaboration of how you guys are managing it day to day, there's been a dress done for separating bus and parents. It is touchy. However, good news of having some of the road work done will be great for the district, because I worked on State Road on that parking lot, and it was just kind of a nightmare. You know, I don't think it improved much, but it was a nightmare on that road that they hadn't touched for decades. So if they have any questions, say widen it. So that you're not, you know, done with hand the bill. Because in reality, by the time this bond passes and design is done, we could be into 25. So that's the whole reality. Let them, they're gonna do their thing, be very vocal, you know, because the load on these buildings with parent drop-offs, not gonna change. Don't let them shortchange you guys, and get all the road you can get. Please and thank you.
I know we're gonna be switching gears, so we can also get this information at another time, but I know you had an opportunity to meet with the Fenton Education Foundation, and just hear some input from those stakeholders that represent various businesses, parents, and other organizations. Were there any big ticket items or takeaways from that group?
I think that group settled, first thing was air conditioning as well, so that's good to hear that there's, consistency. We talked with them about, the field house. We talked with them about the auditorium. So there were different ideas about what can we do? Are there options we can remodel our auditorium and so on? So I think similar to what you're seeing here, they had the same kind of thoughts.
We also got some time, after the Fenton Education Foundation, we got some time with some of the city council members that kind of sit on that, and that was some really great, feedback on community, entities that we should talk to and engage with. So it was a time well spent. So we also have some, stakeholder engagement times planned after spring break, with some of our PTO presidents and some of those people that we solicited stakeholder feedback when he kind of showed you some of our strategic plan stuff, but we want to re-engage with them after some of this facility study and just get their input as well.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Good job.
Thank you for presenting it in multiple formats, it's like you're a teacher or something.
All right, I am ready.
2 hours.
He's a member's guy. He can do it.
Hand it right to Art.
Alright, switching gears.
I'd like to introduce RJ Naughton. RJ is with PFM Financial, and they are our financial advisor for any type of bonding work. Aside from the bond, RJ also assists us with testing our taxable values, making sure the millages that we collect are correct to service our debt, as well as setting our homestead millage. So we're very fortunate to have him here tonight. He is gonna walk you through kind of the numbers behind why we're in a position to have a millage reduction occur. And then as a school district, we always asked ourselves, if we kept the millage level at the same amount, how much projects could we bond for and continue to levy the same millage? And RJ's gonna talk about kind of physically, through the math of it all, how that'll happen. So I would encourage you to ask a lot of questions. This is a interesting topic and it's something that's not necessarily dealt with every day. And RJ is widely known as one of the best, if not the best in the state on this kind of thing. So you saw he knows King Scott and Ock real well in school business circles. If you say, hey, I got these numbers from RJ, they're like, they gotta be solid. So excited to have him here tonight, and we'll turn things over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Doug. As Doug mentioned, I'm a financial advisor, also known as a municipal advisor. And I've been at it for over 30 years. I work with many school districts in Michigan, worked with Fenton for probably well over 20, 25 years. I used to work at Stoddard Barch and Associates, and in 2015, that firm was acquired by PFM. So your bonds had been issued with Stoddard Barch's financial advisor and also PFM. And as a financial advisor, we have fiduciary duty to work in the school district's best interest when it comes to helping you plan for your bond issue and helping you sell your bonds. An example of that is when you're actually selling your bonds, many times there's an underwriter or a brokerage firm involved. And that underwriter has like a fiduciary duty to the bondholder that they're reselling the bonds to. And the bondholder wants a low purchase price and a higher yield. But the school district and the financial advisor, we want a high purchase price and a low yield. So it takes some negotiation when it comes to pricing your bonds. But quite often we get involved early on in the process in helping school districts plan for the bond project in the early phases. Sometimes we're given a project amount and our objective is to lower the millage impact. And we look at different combinations of whether or not to issue the bonds in series, what type of term to have for the bonds, all sorts of tools that we have. Other times, we're looking at millage objective, whether it's a no mill increase or a 1 mill increase or a 2 mill increase, and our objective is to maximize the bonding capacity at that particular millage. So I'll move right on to the schedules, and by the way, if you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask. The school district has four bond issues outstanding, and they're toward their end of their getting closer to the last bond payment. These first two are the 2014 school building and site bonds, series 1, that was from the 2014 voter authorization, and the 2015 refunding bonds that had refinanced the 2006 building and site bonds and the 2005 refunding bonds, and the 2005 refunding bonds had refinanced the 1998 school building and site bonds. So bonds can be refinanced just like mortgages can be refinanced, where we're replacing bonds at a higher rate with bonds at a lower rate. The total, every year when the new taxable value is released, we're looking at the total bond payments for the upcoming year to help us set the debt levy, and that's what I'm leading up to. On the next slide here, we have the other two bond issues outstanding, and these are the other two series from the 2014 voter authorization. So those bonds were issued in series, and then that was done for, because part of that project was it technology and buses?
Yeah, just a quick reminder for the board, in 2014, we had an $11 million issue that was sold in 3 series in 14, in 18, and in 22, and as RJ indicated, that was primarily for buses and for upgrading our technology. So when we talk about a potential bond for a brick and mortar type project, we really haven't had one of those since the 06 issue.
So it's not unusual to have bonds issued in series. Many times it's technology or bus related, where the subsequent series are used for refreshing technology in buses. So the general fund doesn't have to worry about covering those costs for a longer period of time.
And just to add to that real quick, again, just for reference purposes, that from 14 through 22, as a district, we were able to turn over our teacher and our student technology twice, essentially, in that span, and then also renew the entire bus fleet once in that span.
And that total bond payments on the far right there, that's the total of all 4 bond issues. And we're looking at it according to your levy cycle. And the school district's on a mixed levy cycle, where you levy both in July and December to cover the upcoming November and following May bond payments. So we look at the total bond payments, and they're at 5.8 million for the next couple of years, and then goes to 3.5 million, then down to 2.9 million. And that's key in helping us decide how many mills to set each year to cover your upcoming bond payments, and that's part of the property taxes. Another component, so those are your total bond payments. Another component is the taxable value. So the debt levy tax receipts are based on taxable value, which is part of the property taxes for the entire school district. And we look at the taxable value growth to see what trend we have, and your trend is very healthy, where last year the district grew by 5.8%. We're allowed to add back exempt personal property even though it was carved out starting in 2016, because the state reimburses the school district for the equivalent of lost debt levy tax receipts related to that exempt personal property that was carved out of your taxable value. And the taxable value growth has been 4% and above since 2017. And we're projecting 4.5% growth for 2023. At the end of May, we're going to know what the 2023 taxable value is. And that's an important component as the district starts planning for the bond project. Because that will be one unknown that we will certainly know at the end of May, and that will change things. I think 4.5% growth for 2023 is conservative, given that the district had 5.8% growth last year. These are state qualified bonds, and the state has limits on how we're allowed to project taxable value growth going forward on our millage projections. And the rule, what the state allows, is up to the 5-year historical average for the next 5 years, and for beyond that, up to the 20-year historical average, but not more than 3 and not less than 0. So for these projections, we're actually being a little more conservative than that, and I believe we're using 4.5% for the next 6 years, including 2023, and 2.46% thereafter. This is the millage projection before additional bonding. So on the left, we have the tax base, so just over $1 billion in tax base, and the projected growth 4.5% for 4 years, and during that time are the last bond payments for the existing debt. The district has funds on hand, and those are extra funds left over at the end of the levy cycle, which the district's allowed to have, because part of the debt levy tax receipts come from the county. It's part of the county tax settlement. And the county tax settlement is received in June, which is after the last payment for the year in May. So that's the reason why there's what we call a delinquency allowance, and that's set at 8%. And it could be more, and it's not unusual for it to be more for districts that are on what we call a mixed levy cycle. So part of your municipalities are on a July levy, and part are on a December levy. So the district's currently levying 5.1 mils with the 2022, and that was levied both in July of 2022 and December of 2022, and projected to decrease to 5 mils even with the 2023 levy. That is subject to change. Once we know what the 2023 taxable value is, the district will set, with the help of PFM, that levy in June, after we know what the 2023 taxable value is. And what's key here is what the levy is projected to go for your existing debt in 2024, 2.5 mils. So if the levy is at 5 mils in 2023, then it's essentially cut in half for your existing debt. 2.5 mils are falling off, and then the remaining 2.5 mils for the existing debt payments with the 24 levy, and projected go down to 2.2 mils with 2025. So it's not unusual that when school districts have debt millage falling off their existing debt, that millage offsets millage for a new voted bond that's voted in before the first levy, or before the millage falls off the existing debt. So in this case, if the district were to replace the 2.5 mils falling off with the 2024 levy, then the bond vote would occur at the latest in May of 2024 in order to be levied for in June of June of 2024. So the district could have a vote in November of 23 and also levy for the new bonds in, July of '24. And so this will give the district 2 attempts to pass a bond issue and be able to call it a no mill increase, or at least have the 2.5 mills falling off the existing debt, offset the millage for the new bonds. So here's just a little recap about what a bond proposal is all about. The bond proposal is in the, actually, we have an example on the next slide. So I'll just mention that once a bond proposal's voted in, the district has to levy whatever mills is necessary to cover the bond payments or to comply with school bond loan fund rules if they're participating in the school bond loan fund program. This district's not in the school bond loan fund program though. So, and as mentioned on this slide here, sometimes bonds are issued in more than one proposal on the ballot at once. Usually there's one bond proposal. Sometimes after a failed election, sometimes districts consider having more than one bond proposal on the ballot at the same time. In proposal 1 would be the higher priority, proposal 2 would be the projects with the lower priority. And bonds could be issued in more than one series. That means it could be voted in one proposal, but not all the bonds are issued in the first year. And that could be done for several reasons. One reason is that there's a requirement that with any series of bonds, that at least 85% of the proceeds are spent within 3 years, and all the proceeds are spent within 5 years. And sometimes, like if the district is refreshing technology or buses over a long period of time, that's a reason to stagger the series maybe 3 or 4 years apart. So there's other reasons to have bonds issued in series. Sometimes it could increase the bonding capacity if the millage for the existing debt is falling off within the next few years, like in the case of your district, because not only is 2.5 mills falling off with the 2024 levy, but 0.3 mills is falling off with the 2025 levy, and 2.2 mills is falling off with the 2026 levy. So that's why, another reason why districts issue bonds in series, because it could increase the bonding capacity by staggering the series. Also, it lowers the issuance, the interest costs, because if, let's say a district issues 5 million in the first year and 2 million 2 years later, then they're saving 2 years worth of interest on that $2 million by issuing those bonds a couple years later. And as already mentioned, another reason to have bonds issued in series is that part of the subsequent series may be used for refreshing items like technology or buses or even roof projects. So next we have an example of the 2014 bond proposal. And it's an informal question. Shall Fenton area schools issue a bond in an amount not to exceed, in this case, $11 million, to be issued in one or more series for the purpose of, and then there's an indented paragraph describing what the proceeds will be used for. And that's what's being voted on, is to allow the district to issue those bonds. And once issued, the district has to levy whatever millage is necessary to cover the bond payments. Now there is a section for informational purposes only that refers to the estimated millage in the first year for the new bonds, and whether, if it's a millage increase, how much of an increase, and the maximum term, and the estimated millage, average millage over the bond term. So in the case of your 2014 bonds, it referred to 0.4 mills estimated in the first year for the new bonds. But then there was an added phrase for a no mill increase from the prior year levy. So that meant back in 2014, there was 0.4 mills falling off the existing debt that was being replaced with 0.4 mills for a new bond issue. And it may be similar with the November of 2023 proposal. And then there's reference to the outstanding bonds the district has. So next, we have some schedules, and this is a summary of those schedules that were recently prepared. And I wanna emphasize, this is preliminary, very preliminary. This is the maximum, estimated maximum bonding capacity with, maximum bond term of 20 years compared to maximum bond term of 25 years, with bonds issued in 3 series. And eventually, the construction manager would provide a monthly draw schedule describing what the estimated monthly draws are for the project, and that will help us to decide on the number of series, the time between series, and the amount of each series, and the overall bond amount. And here we're targeting a no mill increase. And these are the maximums estimated with 20 and 25-year terms. But if the needs are less, then it could still be a no mill increase. We could just have a shorter bond term or fewer series of bonds. So these aren't the necessarily the target amounts. It's just the estimated maximum. And it's not unusual to have bonds issued in, these are in 5-year increments, 20 years and 25-year terms as the maximum. We could have a 22-year term. And the maximum term of any series does appear in the ballot under the for informational purposes only section. So, and also, I want to mention again, one important variable is the 2023 taxable value. And once we know that at the end of May, that will change what these are, what the bonding capacity is. So with a 20-year term and with the bonds issued in 3 series, the estimated maximum amount of bond is $104.8 million. And the estimated amount of bond proceeds and interest earned on those proceeds that's available for the project is $107.12 million. And in this case, when we have larger bond amounts, it's not unusual to have the estimated project amount be higher than the bond amount. And that's because during the construction period, the school district is allowed to earn interest on the unspent bond proceeds. And with larger bond amounts, it's projected that the district will earn more in interest on bond proceeds than it costs for issuance costs. And the formula is at the very bottom of this page. The bond amount is equal to the project amount plus reimbursable election costs, because part of the election costs, if there are any, could be repaid if the bond is successful, plus issuance costs minus the estimated interest earned on bond proceeds. So that's I'll continue with that 20-year term example. There are 3 series of bonds. First series in 2024, and these are all estimates, 50.9 million. In 2026, 41 million, and in 2029, 12.9 million. And there's interest cost, and that's conservative. That's about 1%, maybe even higher than that now. Interest rates went down quite a bit this past week and a half. So that might be a 1.25%, maybe at least 1% above current market rates, but we don't know where interest rates are going to be when these series are sold. And the first series will be sold at least 4 months after the ballot is prepared. And these are fixed rate bonds. So we like to be conservative with taxable value growth projection and also with projecting interest rates. And the ballot would refer to the estimated millage in the first year for the new bonds, 2.5 mils. And then there'll be an additional phrase added for a no mill increase from the current levy. And that's golden, because having a bond issue at a no mill increase has a passage rate of like 90% compared to 55% with a bond issue with a millage increase. So right in the ballot itself, it's reminding, that it's a reminder that it's a no mill increase from the current levy. But that can be viewed two different ways. It's a no mill increase from the 2023 levy, but it could also be seen as a 2.5 mil increase from what the levy would otherwise be in 2024. So next we have the 25-year term, and the maximum bonding capacity there is 116.8 million, with 48.3 million in the first series, a little bit less than the other, and 51.8 million issued in the second series, and 16.7 million issued in the 3 series. And the amount available, estimated amount available for the project, 119,330,000. And in this case, the first year millage is the same, 2.5, but the average millage is actually lower because it's a longer term. And that average millage, again, is the estimated average millage for new bonds over the bond term. And again, this is just preliminary because this is based on a 5 mil levy in 2023. That's yet to be determined, and also the taxable value growth for 2023 was estimated at 4.5%. So these schedules continue to be updated to help the administrators and everyone else involved decide on the final scope of the project. And we look at things like issuing the bond in series, time between series. Sometimes we decide whether or not they have some of the bond payments covered by the bond proceeds. That's called capitalized interest. Sometimes that helps increase the bonding capacity. All sorts of variables that we look at. Next, we have an example of a chart. This is just the chart for the 20-year term. And this helps describe that it is a nominal increase from the estimated 2023 levy. And it goes back in time to the 2021 levy that was around 5.4 mils, somewhere in there. So the district had lowered the levy from 5.4 to like 5.1 in 2022, and projected to go down maybe a little bit to 5 mils even with the 23 levy. And then there's the 2.5 mils falling off. I'm looking at the blue chart, blue shaded area, where it goes down to 2.5 mils, and it's replaced with 2.5 mils for a new bond issue. It's also possible for a district to have a millage decrease. But many times districts go for no mill increase and just shorten the bond term or lessen the number of series that's needed. But that's one of those situations where I could run scenarios showing the millage decrease example to help the district decide which route to go. And this is the 20-year term, 3 series of bonds, and it's not projected to be at the highest millage for every year. As you see, the highest millage is projected to go out to 2032 and then decrease from there. And so that's so that this new bond issue doesn't inhibit the next bond issue. And it's very possible the district would have another bond issue within that 20 years. This also helps explain why the average millage is greater than the first year. It is greater than the first year millage. So here are the election dates for remaining 2023 election dates and the 2024 election dates. So there's a filing deadline that's 84 days before the election date. That's the latest the district can have a proposal sent to the county. And most bonds, like the districts prior to that, are state qualified. That means the bonds have the state's credit rating, they have the backup guarantee of the state. And by the way, the district had a very good credit rating of an A+. And, but the state's credit rating is a AA. And if your bonds are state qualified, it's more likely there'll be more interest in your bonds. And also more likely your bonds will be at a lower interest rate compared to non-state qualified bonds.
So essentially essentially when we have a very good credit rating and our credit rating is always examined, we go through a Standard & Poor's or Moody's credit review every time we sell bonds. Most recently about a year ago when we sold the last series of 22. But we can use, by getting them state qualified, where essentially the state is extending us their credit rating. So when they go to market, it's the state of Michigan's credit rating because they're a Michigan Public School District, and that can usually save us some interest points by using the state's credit versus our own.
And there's other advantages which I won't go into, but if your bonds are state qualified, there's some hoops we have to jump through.
Yes.
And one is there's a preliminary qualification meeting that's at least 30 days in front of that filing deadline. And that preliminary qualification meeting is when, it's a video call these days, with the administrators, the bond counsel, financial advisor, the architect, construction manager. We meet with Treasury on a video call, and when we go through the preliminary qualification application, page by page, and that application describes the amount of work being done at each building. Did you go over that a little bit?
No.
Okay, so it's a good thing I gave you a refresher on that. So,
You didn't wanna steal your thunder.
So, the preliminary qualification meeting is when the application's initially gone through in a fair amount of detail on that call. And there's always some minor changes. And after that meeting, like soon after that meeting, the preliminary qualification application is dressed up. And it's cleaned up from after what Treasury had commented on. And then it's brought before the board. And then the board votes on submitting that application to Treasury for a 30-day review period. And then that 30-day review period ends just before the filing deadline. And Treasury almost always grants an official preliminary qualification at the end of that review period. And then the school board meets again to vote on the ballot, having the ballot sent to the county. But the ballot is actually prepared at the preliminary qualification meeting, but it's not really voted on to be sent to the county until we actually have preliminary qualified status.
So sometimes people ask, well, why do we have to get the state's approval for a bond issue? The short answer to that question is because we're using their credit rating. And so there's certain things that they want to see to make sure that our enrollment matches what our needs are that we're asking for. They actually go through in the application that the architects do is very, very detailed. It drills down to every classroom. So it's quite a process to go through, but certainly worth it to get a little bit better interest rate.
And so the preliminary qualification meeting for November 2023 vote would occur in June or maybe the beginning of July. And at the very latest, the final scope of the project has to be decided on at the very latest, no later than a week before that PQ meeting. By the way, do you already have a PQ meeting locked in?
We do.
You do, okay,
Yep.
so.
We're prepared if we board decides to go in that direction.
Okay, so it's not unusual for districts to lock in a PQ meeting date if they're looking at an election, particular election. And for this to be like a no-mill increase bond, it is possible to go in May of '24, and that could be the district's second attempt if the district weren't successful with the November of '23 vote, and still be able to refer to it as a no-mill increase. So next, we have my favorite slide. These are the election statistics for Michigan school bond proposals since November of 12. Overall, 69% passage rate. There's a lot of very interesting things about this. But overall, 69% passage rate But what's so interesting is the last 4 elections have been lower than the average. The passage rate, lower than 69% last 4 elections, and that could be, it's always a matter of opinion, right? Why did that happen? Could be because concerns about the economy or increased voter turnout because we had the governor's primary and the governor's election. And it's always a matter of opinion on how that weighs into the passage rate, because in November of 20 was the presidential election, and that had 100% passage rate. But then again, there was only 11 proposals compared to usually having over 20 proposals. And it's a matter of opinion, why did we get 100% passage rate in November of 20? Well, it could be because maybe increased sympathy for schools during the COVID, or maybe because it was exclusively mail-in voting.
Is there
Yes.
any consideration done about the geographic factors, like which schools we're proposing and where they are in the state? Because our state is very different depending on which part of the state you're in.
We don't have it broken out that way, but we could.
I was just curious,
Yes.
because that's where my mind goes, which schools matters a lot.
Yes, I know for some of those elections, school districts on the west side of the state had a more challenging time than other districts. But there's other factors, like other things on the ballot. Yes.
Sorry. Go ahead and finish what you're finishing.
I'm just gonna say, there could be a municipal proposal on the ballot that it may not be that popular, and you could be bringing out no voters, but that's always a matter of opinion.
Question I have is, I understand the third column. How does column 1 and column 2 differentiate themselves? Because
Sure,
aren't they
I was
both
just getting to
a
that.
millage?
That's a great segue, thank you.
I put the cart before the horse there.
Yeah. So, that was, the first column is, those proposals that were, all the proposals for school bonds. The next column over are of those that had a millage increase from the millage at the time. And that passage rate's 55%. And then looking at the section to the right of that, are of those proposals that were a no mill increase from the millage at that time. And that's a 90% increase. So there's that big difference, and that's probably one of the reasons why one of the most commonly asked questions I get is, does a district have any bonding capacity at a no mill increase? And that could be due for several reasons. Primary reason is, and more common, is like for your district, your total bond payments are falling off. And that's causing the millage for the existing debt to drop. It could be attributed to other things, or a combination of other things, like something very large being added to your tax base, like wind turbines or something like that. And it could be, there are all sorts of reasons why millage goes down for the existing debt. But having a no mill increase is often a window in time opportunity. That means the first year levy for the new bonds, and I should preface this by saying, for school districts that are not in the school bond loan fund program, the millage increase, having a no mill increase is a window in time opportunity, because the first year of levy for the new bonds has to coincide with the millage decrease for the existing debt. For that to happen, the district would need to have a bond issue in November of 23, February of 24, or May of 24. By the way, that presidential primary is subject to change depending on the last day of session for the legislature. It could be in March. If a district were in the school bond loan fund program, there could be a longer window in time, because they're just extending their stay in the school bond loan fund program. So I know that was a lot of information. And I work with a team of folks in Ann Arbor, and it's not just one of us working on your bond project, it's a whole team of folks.
Now, if you could close your textbook, RJ's gonna administer a quiz to everyone.
RJ, do you find that if you're unsuccessful in November, just looking at the May without the millage increase, it looks to be pretty successful. Do you find that districts who have to go for it a second time usually have pretty good success?
I believe so, because they get feedback from the community, and sometimes the scope of the project changes. And sometimes, quite often, the scope of the project goes down a little bit. Just to try to gather those votes. Sometimes it is, if it lost by, this is always a matter of opinion, I say. If they just lost by a couple votes or a few votes, then maybe the program doesn't change at all. And it's maybe more likely to change if it's lost by a larger margin.
Do most districts then change it some the second time they go for it if they're not successful the first time?
I would say yes, if they lost by a larger margin, yes. They may get feedback from the community on other things to include.
Sometimes it can be then just how much you're working at letting your people involved know what you're, and the communication of it. Interesting.
And you have a team of experts, and we all have opinions on how to present information to the community to keep them informed on the millage impact and what the project's all about.
RJ and Doug, quick question, enlighten me on the process. Are these bonds restructurable, refinanceable through the course of their life at any point, multiple times? You know, if we're selling them at a high and all of a sudden the economy changes and goes back to where it was a couple of years ago, where we've got really low rates and.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The industry, there's a lot to that though. There's bonds with the term longer than 10 years have maturities after 10 years callable starting in the 10th year. So if you got a 20-year bond issue, that means that maturities 11 years and now are subject to be called in early on the first call date, which is usually 10 years after issuance. And that's for each series of bonds. And bonds could be called in even before their first call date, but because of current law, that could only be done with taxable debt if they're called in more than 90 days ahead of their call date. If they're called within 90 days of a call date, then they're tax exempt debt, just like the original bond issue is tax exempt. So most municipal bonds are tax exempt, which means that the bondholder doesn't pay taxes on the interest earnings, and because of that, it's at a lower interest rate. And so it's good to be able to have the opportunity to refinance the bonds with tax exempt debt, because they're at any given time, and most of the time, the tax exempt rate is lower than the taxable rate. So just like with the mortgage, as interest rates decrease, and if it's lower than what those bonds were issued at, and if there's a significant amount of savings, then those bonds will be refinanced. And that's one of the things that we look at.
So for example, I always use, and it's kind of funny because here we are 20 plus years later, you know, in 1998, we had about a $49 million issue that did cafeteria and stage upgrades at all 3 elementary schools, but the lion's share of that money was to build the current middle school. We refinanced, and the middle school opened in 2000. We refinanced that in 05. We refinanced that in 2015. So those bricks and mortar type of bonds, you would tend to refinance, which this is gonna lend itself to being very similar to that. The bond issue that we had in 2014 was much shorter, and it was smaller, $11 million for technology and buses, based on the length of that bond term and what you're buying. Has a little bit limited use compared to a building. Those aren't the kinds of bonds you would refinance. I usually, from a procedural standpoint, I usually talk to RJ at least twice a year and say, because he's done bond sales across the state, not just for school districts, but also for municipalities, and that sort of stuff. And I will say to him, you know, what did you most recently sell? What's the rate? You know, is this a good time to refinance? Should we wait one more year? And so, you know, it's kind of interesting that we're talking about this debt falling off. And it's not a perfect analogy, but the way I tend to explain it to people is we sold the bonds to build the middle school. Everybody can kind of relate to that because it's our last new building. We sold it in '98, it opened in 2000. Here we are in 2023, after 2 refis, lowering the interest rate, that bond is essentially fallen, that debt, you know, the middle school is essentially paid off, is another way to kind of explain it, conceptualize it. And so, by continuing to levy the same amount of debt, we'll be able to capture anywhere between 100 and 116, you know, that RJ mentioned, of that gap. Now, granted, the tax levy would stay the same, but when people say, well, how does this all work? It's essentially the middle school being paid off conceptually, and then keeping the same tax levy, but we're able to generate about $110 million worth of projects. So this would be the kind of thing, if we did move forward with this and the electors approved it, you know, probably 4 to 5 years out after that initial issuance, we'll be talking to RJ saying, is this a good time to refi? Is it not a good time to refi? The other thing when we look at a refinance too on a multi-series bond is when you've got a second series coming up, that's a good time to look back and see how is the first series performing, and do we look at a refi at that point. You know, when we talk about series, and RJ, correct me if I'm wrong, the first multi-series bond we did in this district was in 2014, and it worked out great. You know, with technology and buses, we hit the timing very well, and the useful life cycle worked very well. If we were to go for a new bond and sell it in 3 series, it's just a reminder to the board, that's 1 vote. And then we will confirm that these are when, you know, potential series would go. But if there's a change, or if there's a need for more capital up front, we just have to have 1 vote. No, series are not set in stone. The district could say, we've got some advantageous sort of things. If we sell the second series a year early, and we've gonna have construction in a particular area, we can get some economies of scale by only having the contractors here for a certain period of time, not coming and going. So there is some flexibility there. I don't want people to think in a multi-year series, you're married to those numbers, they can change.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because usually I emphasize that when I go through that one page on the slide, and I forgot to. So just to paraphrase what you just said, when bonds are issued in series, the only reference to that in the ballot is that the bonds are to be issued in 1 or more series.
Mm-hmm.
The particulars of the original plan, the number of series, time between series, and the amount of each series, that can change, and it quite often does, from the original plan, depending on needs, like the construction project and how that's going, and need for additional funding for the next series. And also based on millage and your taxable value growth in between series, and also because of any refundings that could occur, even though you're not projected to have a refunding on your existing debt. So that's why it does offer tremendous flexibility in having bonds issued in series, because the amount of each series, time between series, and number of series, that can all change, as long as the total amount issued is not more than the not to exceed amount in the ballot.
It also helps if you know you've got a series out there, and the conversations you might have with RJ is, you know, look at what's going on in the markets and what the interest rates are. You know, if we were up to sell a series of bonds right now that was a bigger, not a technology type of thing, conversations I'd be having, and Heidi and I would be having with RJ would be, should we sell now, or if we can afford to wait 6 months, you know, kinda asking him to read the future. It gives you that flexibility to price the sale when interest rates may be a little bit better.
Well, that kind of leads to my next question, my last question, I promise, but I really want to kind of solidify my mind in this whole process going forward, because it is a long-term commitment. And it goes back to the refinancing side of it. So you've explained that they are refinanceable, they are renegotiable. That being said, is that process a negotiation process as well? You got a 4% bond, you got a buyer at 2, is there the ability to meet in the middle for these on the restructuring and refinancing side?
So when bonds are refinanced, they don't need to have a public vote, so you're allowed to just refinance the existing debt. And as far as setting the interest rate on the bonds, it's similar to the original bonds. There are different ways bonds can be brought to the market. There's a competitive bid approach, and I believe that the district has experience with both of the major ways, which is a negotiated approach, where you know who the brokerage firm is that you're working with in advance, and then you have a pricing date that the interest rates are being set, and there's an order period that brokerage firm is reoffering those bonds. And leading up to that day of sale in that order period, the financial advisor is negotiating the interest rates to be set at the beginning of the order period. And then based on the demand for each maturity during the order period, the yields go either up or down. So some maturities may be oversubscribed and the yields go down for that maturity.
Gotcha.
In other maturities, there's not enough demand and yields have to get bumped up. But what's key is to go out at the beginning of that order period at an appropriate level. And that's where the negotiating process takes place between the financial advisor and the brokerage firm. But another method of sale is called competitive bid approach. And with that method, a notice of sale is published about a week before the bid opening, inviting banks and brokerage firms to bid on your bonds. And most bids are received on the internet. And the financial institution with the lowest interest rate is awarded the issue. So that describes the methods. And so sometimes it's a bidding process where the rates are set depending on who has the lowest interest rate. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages of both methods. With the negotiated sale, the underwriter has more lead time to find interested purchasers, because even before the day of pricing, they're out there trying to market your bonds. So it's a matter of opinion, having that additional lead time, whether or not that results in a lower interest rate compared to a competitive bid approach. In general, larger issues tend to go negotiated, but they don't have to.
With our most recent one, it's that we did a year ago, the third series in the 2014 bond. It was competitive. They have a software system they use, and then we have a bid opening, if you will, on a conference call or a Zoom call. And, you know, just like a construction bid or anything else, you just read them off. And then, we always do due diligence, cause, you know, occasionally you'll see a bank on there you've never heard of. And so we wanna check and make sure that everything is legitimate with that.
You mean like Silicon Valley?
Yeah. They don't hold any of our bonds, I checked, fortunately. And then you accept it, so usually they're within a couple fractions of a percentage of each other.
So we back up just one step, is we have the sale date, and that's when the bonds are, when the interest rate is set. And it's set with that financial institution, sometimes they're reoffering those bonds. And then 3 to 4 weeks later is the delivery date, and that's when the district receives the funds. Those bonds could very well be traded in the secondary market.
Resold.
But how they're traded in the secondary market really doesn't impact the school district.
Right.
Because you've already received your funds on day of delivery.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, I appreciate it both.
You're welcome.
Yeah. RJ, I just wanna talk a little little bit, you started the presentation, and I think it's important for people, not only for the board, but people in the audience to see too, is a large portion of the reason why we can do a lot of these things is because of the taxable value of people's homes in our community, and because we have a quality community, and those taxable values continue to rise because of their value. I think that's important to show as well, because if we didn't have that, then a lot of the figures that we're talking about wouldn't be possible. And so I think that's why it's hard for, I think, people to conceptualize a building that didn't cost, you know, what we could leverage of over 100 million, didn't cost that how many years ago, but because of the taxable value of people's homes, we can leverage that much without increasing people's taxes. And so I think that's important for everybody to kind of realize and conceptualize. We have a great community that we live in, and that allows us to have good quality schools and allows us to even be talking about these things.
I totally agree. Not many districts have a tax base of over $1 billion.
Right.
And not just a tax base of over $1 billion, but a tax base that is growing and has a good history of growing at a healthy rate over 4%.
Thank you. Alright, so we're gonna take a quick break for 10 minutes. Can I get a motion to adjourn for 10-minute break? So moved. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?